Welcome back into the National Rundown. This is episode 11, and me and Geono are back for so much more talk about the CFL and the CEBL because there was, again, so much that went on this week. We're going to be breaking it all down, going game by game, going coast to coast, seeing everything that happened. But first, let me check in with you, Geono. How was your week, and are you excited to be back here again?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I have the same question being asked every week, and it's always the same answer every week. I'm always feeling great. You know, it's just awesome with the CBL. You know, the Stingers have been on an up and down swings. You know, obviously me covering that, it's always a great time to be able to cover a fun team. And obviously the Elks, you know, even better to be able to have a winning football team in Edmonton. It still feels weird to say even after 6 weeks, but you know what? That's kind of where we're at in the CFL right now. It feels amazing. So, you know what? I could not be more excited. These are really the weird points where, you know, there's not very much on the Canadian sports schedule. But you know what? It's like, especially with the Jays not doing as good as what many people probably would have hoped, you know, maybe that means that the CFL has some better storylines and the CBL has some better storylines to keep an eye on. So, you know what? It's maybe a good trade-off, but at the end of the day, I still think it's a great time in the league, and especially heading into the more, you know, dog days of the summer.
Yeah, honestly, I think you bring up a good point there. I think this is the perfect time for some spotlight to really be on the CEBL and the CFL. So we're going to kind of help you all do that and really shed some light on all these topics. But we'll start things off because we're really getting kind of down to the nitty-gritty of the CEBL for starters. And the CFL is ramping up. So we're going to check right into our national pulse, put our finger on the pulse, go coast to coast, and really see what's going on. As always, we're going to start over there with you in the West. What were some of the big storylines from this week in both leagues?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing starting off with the CBL, staying in Edmonton, was the fact that the Stingers were 4-0 at one point before, you know, they lost to Winnipeg. That game was really a nail-biter in its fullest, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it a little bit later. That really felt like a game Edmonton probably could have won. And you know what? I'll say this really quickly: the team did not really falter. You could tell on everybody that they recognized, you know, they probably let that one slip away, and that they didn't feel like a crushing blow. So that was a really interesting game for me. Obviously, you know, also being on Canada Day, that was really a really big part of the team's season to see that unfold. You know, also looking at it, the Mamba beat the Surge. The Stingers also beat the Bandits, like I said, to go to 4-0. The Surge also got their second win of the season, which was just absolutely crazy. It feels like just when we're like, you know, I said the Mamba were going to go 0-24. You know what? Maybe we were almost right on somebody having the worst season on record. Didn't probably think it was going to be Calgary, but you know what? That's kind of the situation we're in right now. So you know what? That's always been amazing to kind of check on, is just see where the Western Conference is. And right now, it is an absolute dogfight. We got Winnipeg up by half a game right now on Vancouver. Winnipeg has not played one game. They play Edmonton on Thursday, which is the day before we're recording this. So obviously when you guys see this, it'll probably be done. How that kind of turns out could really shake up how we look at the standings. So that'll be really interesting. But obviously Vancouver has gone through some change. But they're still kind of hanging on right in that first spot as well. So they're within striking distance. Edmonton and Saskatoon are just battling it out for the third and fourth seeds. And, you know, depending how this week goes, it really feels like it'll be a pivotal week in how the playoffs really shape up. So that's all that's kind of going on in the CBL. But, you know, flipping to the CFL, there's been some pretty big things as well. Obviously, Edmonton and Saskatchewan are now tied in the standings for first in the West. Edmonton's going to take on Ottawa. Winnipeg is also going to take on Toronto later on Friday Night Football. Then Saturday it's Calgary at Montreal, and then Hamilton will take on Saskatchewan. So, you know, the guys really, I think we talked about it on, I think, North of the End Zone. You guys talked about it. You know, it was really a pivotal week. You know, talked about the Bombers a lot, all that stuff. I'm excited to see where that kind of goes, because it's, again, once we kind of get through this part of the week, and I think after week 7, we're a third of the way through the season. So, we're kind of approaching the point where it's not so early anymore. It's not so early for the CEBL. They're getting to the end of their season, and the CFL's getting even later, man. So, definitely it's really ramping up from what, back in May. It's starting to be a fun time of the year.
Yeah, I know. It's super exciting. In the West, there seems to be a lot going on. It seems to always be chaotic, but here in the East, we have a few things going on. I think probably the biggest thing coming out this week was probably the news of Bo Levi Mitchell, suffering that injury against the Bombers this week. Just very heartbreaking to see. It's just tragic for the entire team, the entire league, and all the fans as well, because he was having such a great season, such a really, off to a great start for those Ticats, and now he's likely probably going to be out for the rest of the year. I know they kind of left the door open, but, suffering that, broken, leg, ankle area. So
yeah,
that's really that's really hard to come back from, and especially late in his career. I know he wants to make a comeback. Hopefully he can. All the best for him, but we'll definitely have to see. But heartbreaking for Hamilton. They're going to hand the ball off to Trey Ford. Trey Ford. We'll have to see how that goes, but as for Hamilton, we're going to have to see, but it's a very heartbreaking week for sure. Moving forward, for Ottawa, they hang tough with the Rough Riders this week. That was a very interesting game for them. I think their defense played pretty well, but again, Riders came out on top. Trevor Harris said he didn't have his best game, but, they still squeaked out the win. As for Toronto, lost a tough one to those Stamps. Big game. We're going to talk about that lots. Big win for Calgary there, but Toronto played a decent game, but it was just no match for Vernon Adams and those Stamps. As for the CEBL, Scarborough is looking great again, 14-2. As for those other 4 teams, it gets a little bit more, into the nitty-gritty. Brampton picked up Justin Hamilton, Trenton Flowers. They played great. Looks like they might be able to do a few things for them, keep them in the race there. But they're still now sitting about 6 games back of Scarborough for that first seed, which was a pretty close gap for the entire season. Now it's really getting pretty big, and we'll have to see if Brampton can at least hang on to that 2 seed. As for Ottawa and Montreal, they're going to battle it out tonight. We'll have to see. That's pretty pivotal for the 3rd seed there, but they're just kind of fighting for position down there. And as for Niagara, they're sitting 5-10, about 2 games back of that 4th spot. There's still a way to get in there, but for their back-to-back campaign, not looking too great so far. We'll have to see. We're going to break it all down, but those are pretty much some of those big storylines coming out of the East. We'll send it over to you. We're going to start things off with a little bit of CFL talk. I want to get into that big game, like I just mentioned, with Vernon Adams and the Argos. How crazy was that game, and how big of a performance was that for VA?
I mean, I've been watching the CFL for a very long time. I think I've made that very, very clear when we've been recording this for 11 episodes now in some of the North of the End Zone podcasts. It really feels like this was one of the best quarterback performances I think we've ever seen in the CFL. I don't think that that's an understatement at all. I want to get the stats right, because this was when it's this big of a night, you want to be correct. Being able to throw for 405 yards and 6 passing touchdowns and 1 rushing touchdown. Let's not forget about that. That is probably that's probably amazing. Like, you got to think about it too. You can play this game in 1,000 careers, right? And, how many of them don't even get 7, career passes, like receiving touchdowns or rushing touchdowns? There's guys that do that, right? There's guys that don't end up getting that part. But for VA to go out there, I don't think you set out every night saying, I'm going to be in the end zone 7 times, but, or find the end zone 7 times. But I think that was really an impressive thing. I've told everybody this, and I feel like I've been a big VA believer and an advocate. There's been so many times when I'm like, when this guy is on, this guy is on. There's no stopping him. He's the best quarterback in the league when he does hit his peak. And he just kind of proved it then, where you can go. Honestly, too, 400 yards, that's great. We've seen Chad Kelly do that. But to be able to get 7 touchdowns, that's even crazier, right? I don't think many people would think that would come from that. You'd probably expect 3 or 4. But 7, you're lighting it up, and you're throwing the whole playbook out. But This man was just unbeatable, right? There's some nights where I've said it, they call him Big Play VA, right? This guy he was so much better than his competition. I don't think this was necessarily as bad of a shot to Toronto. I think, honestly, like it was maybe a setback. This is probably a big game for them to kind of see, okay, where do we kind of fit in the league? But I think this was the clicking point. This was the point where things started to work for Calgary, where you said, okay, this makes sense, right? We'd seen them struggle to put those things together in the 0-2 record. This felt like the game they put it together for a full 60, and really they got that. You could see it immediately, right? When people are, like Dedrick Mills had 66 rushing yards. That's not great, but at the same time, like, to be able to say, okay, our passing game can handle things, that's a really good sign, right? When, like, you see the team find the ways to make it happen, I think that's really encouraging, and you can start to forgive an 0-2 start when you see a performance like this to say, okay, I maybe had concerns, but they stopped the bleeding. And that's the most important part. You stop the bleeding, you get back on track, and you start building wins. Don't really think there was a better way to do it than crushing the Argos 58-36. That's probably the best way you'd want to be going into your next game. I think I read somewhere, you want to go 1-0 in each week. Like, that's true, right? It's 1 week at a time. I really feel like this could be a turning point for Calgary's season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing for me, especially something I mentioned, a few weeks back, was them getting off to slower starts and not really finding it until late in that second half. But even last week, this week, they've shown that they can find it the entire game, and VA has just been playing amazing. And, Owen was mentioning yesterday on the podcast that he was just loving him, and he was telling me about how he never really got a shot in the NFL, and just because he was a little bit shorter, he had all the tools, he had a great college career, played at Oregon, but just because he wasn't, as tall as the other guys, that was kind of the big reason he never got a shot. But for him to be on this stage doing his thing, it's just, he's one of those guys who can probably make the CFL, theirs. So VA, amazing game. But
I want to add on to that as well, because it sparked something that was in my mind that I saw on Twitter when I was looking at X or Twitter, whatever. I saw on Polymarket, they're like, this CFL quarterback deserves a shot in the NFL, and it was Bo Levi Mitchell. I'm like, hey, okay, this guy is 37. I'm like, he's like we're not talking some Doug Flutie stuff here, right? Like, I mean, we love Bo Levi, but I'm like, we're not gonna see 37 Bo Levi go off into the NFL. And Trevor Harris as well, they posted that out. Now, I don't know if that's necessary, that Trevor Harris one was necessarily like for engagement, but I'll tell you what, it gave me quite a big of a laugh. Like, hey, I'm like, anything that they can bring to the CFL is great, but at the same time, I'm like, it's kind of a good laugh to say it's probably not going to happen. I'm like, you look at like Nathan Rourke, I'm like, that was a guy who literally was on a practice squad and probably should have been a backup for like the New York Giants. But hey, it is what it is. Those are the conversations that we should be having, not focusing on Bo Levi. But we'll get to him in a little bit. Just wanted to throw that in there. That talking about a guy like VA, like getting his shot right. I'm like, there was a guy who had his shot right there, right? So,
oh man, yeah, that's weird. That almost feels like, I mean, Phillip Rivers is different, but it feels like Phillip Rivers coming into the NFL again. It's like, it just didn't work. But
I honestly, with you, like, as much as I think Trevor Harris is a great quarterback, would he be able to play in the NFL? No, I don't think so. Like, I think he's just too accustomed to the CFL game. Like, you got to remember as well, like, the CFL football's bigger. There's a certain way you got to throw it, right? That's if you talk to a lot of quarterbacks, you got to really lob it in there. Now, Ricky Ray was amazing at that. That's why I remember that a lot as an Edmonton fan, right? Like, growing up, you could tell a lot of, there needs to be that lob, and there's a specific way you need to throw the football. That doesn't necessarily work in the NFL. You're going to get picked off by, some guy that was a D1 5-star recruit, right? Like, we're not talking about guys that, got here by accident. This, like, you're playing against the best of the best. So I think that I don't think Trevor Harris would do very well in that spot. But nonetheless, it would be a very cool story. And nonetheless, you're right. It would be a total Phillip Rivers situation. So I like that. But yeah, moving on. I just wanted to throw that in there because I was like, that's absolutely funny and kind of relevant to the NFL quarterback situation.
Very interesting. But yeah, and to wrap that up, big win from the Stamps. Looking forward. It'll be another big game for them to try to prove themselves against Montreal this week. So we'll have to see how that goes. We'll talk about that more a little later on. Moving forward into the big game of the week here, which was, the Bombers, Ticats. That one had a lot of heartbreak. Both quarterbacks going down with injuries. Obviously, Bo Levi's was pretty more substantial. But looking at Caleros, he went down early in that first quarter, I believe, with an injury kind of to the neck, shoulder area, something he's had, issues with in the past. So there's a little bit of worry there and concern, but Elgersma came into the game, his first debut in the CFL, played well, but, they didn't really give him a lot of risky plays to do. It was more like handing it off, short throws. He didn't have to do anything crazy, but he managed it pretty well. I mean, they ended up getting the win, so that was nice. But I think, going forward, obviously Drew Brown wasn't dressed for that game, hence the reason he probably didn't come in there. So he'll probably be starting this week if Caleros isn't good to go. There's still, question marks there. We don't really know anything. We don't even know the severity of the injury, but it doesn't seem to be too bad, so we'll have to see there. But if Drew Brown gets the nod, it's another great opportunity for him to go out. And it really shows that trade they made was kind of interesting. I mean, and really kind of went into some conspiracies yesterday because it was really kind of weird how it just happened, and now this whole thing's going on. It's just kind of fell perfectly to them, and now it was definitely probably worth that first round pick, right?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I think that was really interesting too, right? It's kind of they saw into the future a little bit because I think we all questioned the Drew Brown move. I'm like, why is he going there? I'm like, you got Elgersma. I'm like, do you think you can beat out Elgersma? I'm like, I don't know about that. that was an interesting situation, but nonetheless, that was a really interesting one too. Going to be like that's a huge part too. Whoever they end up playing at quarterback, that'll be a storyline in itself, right? Of who kind of gets that. This could be a very big turning point in where does Elgersma go? Where does Drew Brown go? So I'd be very interested to see that. It would be very ironic if it ends up with one of them going to the Tiger Cats. But I also saw this morning that they did sign a new quarterback as well. So I think it was Jared Daggy. So nonetheless, that was really interesting. I also saw that this was the first game that I don't remember who this was from. I just remember seeing it on Twitter that it was the first game I think since 1969 that we've had two U Sports quarterbacks throw. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know how true that is. I'll trust it. I remember it was from somebody. It might have been 3 Down Nation. I don't remember 100%, but whatever it is, I'm pretty sure people know what I'm talking about. That's true. That's crazy. I'm not going to go out here and say I know that off the back of my hand because I don't know Canadian U Sports quarterback stats going back to the 60s. But it definitely felt like that was an interesting part too. Obviously not the greatest circumstances you want it to happen under, but I remember it was a big part when we had Trey Ford go up against Nathan Rourke in the CFL not that long ago. I think it was 2 years ago or last year. And that was really weird because it was a long time since we had a Canadian versus a Canadian quarterback. So to see a Canadian U Sports quarterback versus a Canadian U Sports quarterback, even more of a cool, unique storyline that things don't happen. Obviously, like I said, we never saw that for a long time. So to be able to see it back to back in a short time frame in a few years is really interesting. But a small note on that, obviously, really unique game here. This was a big game for both teams. I don't think realistically, Winnipeg or Hamilton should really come away thinking this turns the tide of their seasons in a positive or a negative way because they lose a game. I think it more comes down to they're worried about the health of their quarterback. I think that this is where, you think about, okay, obviously I did not like that the Bo Levi statement did not kind of have a timeline. That scares me, right? If you usually you want a decent timeline, you don't come out and say one. It really raises a lot of concern of okay, this could be long term. They don't know, right? There's so many questions that come up with it that it's you don't even know where to start and if you're on the right track. So for me, that comes off really as a worrying sign. That's the one thing I think everybody can kind of understand, because if it was a quick thing, obviously anytime you get surgery, it's probably not going to be a quick thing. So that raises a lot of questions for me about this is the more important part of this game, right? You don't necessarily say, hey, we won a game or we lost the game by a point. It's more, what's the health of our quarterbacks? Because Bo Levi Mitchell was playing the best football of his career at age 36, 37. That does not happen, but it does in the CFL. And I think we went into that when I was talking about, why I was such a big believer in Bo, was just this guy had such a great resume. He's seen everything, man. He's seen all the coverage. Everybody's tried to throw everything at him before. He just keeps throwing. He keeps thriving. So I think that's what was really unique here, right? Is that be able to have a quarterback of this age be able to dominate just doesn't happen anymore, right? I don't know if we were going to have him in our MLP pick. I think he had the potential. And anytime you see a guy that's living it up, having one of the best years of his career, I think it means something. He's won 2-3 Grey Cups. He's won, MLPs. Like, this is a big time player. And when he's having a good season like this, it puts the league on watch, especially when you thought about how tight the East was looking before that game. Now it changes a little bit. If Hamilton can stick with the big boys and, with Chad Kelly and Davis Alexander, I think there's a lot of conversation to be had there. But, that's on the Winnipeg side. The Hamilton side. The Winnipeg side is even more important, right? The West is going to be a slaughterhouse. How we want to stack everybody up, I still think it's maybe a little bit too early before we get out ahead of ourselves. But, there's some big games coming up for Edmonton, especially against BC. So, there's a lot of movement that can happen. And I think if you're Winnipeg, you feel probably more confident that you have a better situation to fall back into with Elgersma and Drew Brown. But at the end of the day, man, you start looking and saying this was worst case scenario for both teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's certainly not going to make either of them really happy about their records going forward and what's to come. But if you want to see, me and Owen break down the quarterback situations a lot more in depth, we covered Hamilton and Winnipeg really, really closely. So make sure you go check out North of the End Zone if you want to see that. But I do want to swing things over to the West because, like you just mentioned, that Elks-Lions game, that one felt pivotal for the West as well, right? Because if Edmonton wins that, the gap between 4-0, 0-4 is a lot bigger than 3-1, 1-3, especially considering now BC goes on the bye and they play Edmonton next. So they have the chance to really pull themselves right back into the race here. And it's really not something you should be, thinking is out of the question. You should be really confident.
I agree.
Especially off a bye in a team you just beat. So for me, that's really interesting. But I'll send it to you and ask you what you thought of Edmonton in this game and what kind of, went wrong maybe.
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, they did kind of play good enough to win for 90% of the game. I do think that was the big part. Looking at it, though, it was the second quarter that really blew things open. And when you can't allow almost 19 points in one quarter, that just can't happen. And I think anybody can tell you that, and that's stating the obvious, right? When you're scoring 24 and you're allowing 19 in the quarter, you're probably not going to win that football game. And I think anybody can agree with that. I think they played majority well enough that, say you maybe get a few more things to go your way, you can take a little bit more out of it. Obviously, because of how close the CFL has been this year, a 12-point loss does not feel... It feels like a blowout, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
A 12-point loss does not usually mean a blowout in any other league, but, talking about, the CFL, it feels like it because of how close the scoring's been this year. So I think that's probably the one takeaway is that, maybe the score... takes more of an implication on what people might think this is a really momentum stopper. I don't think so. I think this is kind of the same Edmonton team we've seen. Obviously, Justin Rankin did not play nearly as good as what we'd hoped. But also at the same time, Cody Fajardo almost threw for 400 passing yards, right? He had 3 interceptions, but he had 3 passing touchdowns. And, at the end of the day, we're looking for the Elks to see something of, okay, for the longest time, there was nothing there. There was no foundation. I'm like, you couldn't even see a bright, end of the tunnel. Everything was so negative. It's like they don't even have the right people on the field. Now it does. It feels like they have the right pieces of the puzzle. It's about executing on the field. And I think that's probably a heck of a lot better position to be in than 2 years ago when you're like, do we even have the right talent on the field? So I think that's been the little bit of the better conversation to have. I do think, because BC was probably going to be a trap game, Edmonton kind of fell into that.
Yeah.
I loved seeing on the BC Lions Instagram after the game. I don't know if you saw this, but they clipped the Elks Nation guys calling the Nathan Rourke a one-trick pony and all that stuff. Oh, and that was a little bit of a shot across the bow. But I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm like, it's the BC Lions, adapting to ways social media is now. What? I think to be honest with you, I didn't necessarily agree with the take because I'm like, Justin Rankin is really just carrying the Edmonton Elks. He was having the best start by a CFL running back since 2013. And all of a sudden, he posts 19 yards and they lose a football game. I think that says a lot, just how much Justin Rankin means to this football team. I don't think there's really any other way to really put it, right? Even if he does only post 19 yards and you still score 24, that's encouraging, but I think that this team really relies on him to be the X factor, and if you can shut him down, it gives yourself a way better chance to win football games. You're probably going to win more football games than you lose if you shut him down like that. So, credit to BC. Like that's the big thing that I think people got to take away from this game is that they went out there and earned it. They could have very well just, sat back and said, hey, it is what it is, but they didn't. They went out and fought. They went out and earned that win. 36 points it means you had a great day, right? Like that's the big thing. I think, Nathan Rourke, as much as, maybe I've been a little bit too high on him, I still think this is a reason why. You see what he can kind of do to help lead his team. I think he's a leader, and I think that's the kind of people you want at quarterback. And right now, this is really just the best situation for the BC Lions. I think, we talked about how big their game was against Calgary to not slip to that 0-3 spot. But right now, you're talking about, okay, you just beat a team, you're going into the bye, and then you're going to beat a team, you're going to meet the team again. And there's probably a good chance you're going to want to try to beat them, right? Like, there's a good chance you can feel really good about that. So I'm really interested in that because Edmonton has to play Ottawa this week. And as much as they may be the worst team statistically in the league right now, they still got to prep on a shorter time to play the BC Lions. So that's more what I'm focusing on. I think that this is a really good opportunity for BC if they wanted to start momentum. Had to be there. They could not lose that. They could not drop to 0-4, in my opinion. You could not do it. It was not an option. They went out there and they did it. So I think just credit to BC, man, because they really proved that they're not gonna just die quietly. They're gonna go out and fight. I think this changes a lot of where I think the playoff outlook might look for the playoff standings. I think the Elks have a greater chance of dropping. Now, I'll say that. Like, I think it's really Saskatchewan, Calgary. To be honest with you, I'm putting Winnipeg down. I might put Winnipeg and Edmonton at 4, and then I'd probably put 3 right now, BC. And I know that you might say that's crazy, but just hear me out. I think that there's something here where I'm saying, okay, this is BC coming alive, right? And we saw maybe Edmonton is not that great. Maybe they're not, as good as their record showed. I think there was just a lot of, talk about, how much stock do you take in the 3-0? How much stock do you take into it? I looked ahead, right? Like, they play Ottawa in this week coming up. I'm like, that's going to probably be a win, but it's an easy team, right? They played Ottawa twice, and if they get win number 4. I think that means something, to be honest with you. Then they play BC again, which again, I'm like, I'm not taking Edmonton to win that game. I think BC is going to come out and prove that they can win it. Then you're playing Saskatchewan back to back, and that's taking you through August 1. And I know the Riders have had a little bit of a more like injury riddled stretch, but that's a big game. Like, those are big games to go back to back on. Then it's the Montreal Alouettes, and then after that it's the Toronto Argonauts, which again, by any indication, are still going to be a tremendous offensive team. And then you finally get to Winnipeg on August 21st. And I'm like, that's the first team that I look at to maybe say, this team might not be that good, depending on, again, what happens with Collaros, just how they stack up against the West. I'm a little bit concerned about the stretch coming up. And I think that that's why this game against BC is making me say, okay, I might put Edmonton at the 4 for right now until they prove me otherwise. Because right now I think that the 3-0 start might have just been a little bit more inflated by, beating some bad teams and then also that rain win in Montreal. Still credit them for winning that, but at the end of the day, it's like, do you go up and say, they're the best team in the league? I don't necessarily know right now. So that's kind of where I'm sitting at. I know it's a little bit of deviation, but that's kind of where my thought process was going with the whole situation, is that this kind of changed for me where I saw the West team stack up.
Well, yeah, no, that's very interesting. And I actually personally have a lot of, points on that game for the BC and Edmonton. I think BC proved themselves on the defensive side of the ball. I think that was the biggest thing. They had no turnovers going into this game on the season, right? And then they came out of here with 4. So this was, the biggest thing. We always knew their offense was great and they could put up points, at
it was really the defense.
High regard. And it was the defense. So in this game especially, and then looking at Edmonton, I think to go along with the BC's defense, I think Fajardo's line was, like, aside from the interceptions, obviously, 395 yards, 3 touchdowns. It looks a lot better than I think he actually played. I think, he had some really costly turnovers, especially that one interception right into the end zone. So that was big for me. Yeah. And then especially, the Rankin fumble was kind of big as well. So, taking care of the ball, and something that Edmonton has done really well this season is managing the game well, taking care of the ball. So this was kind of out of the ordinary for me from them, from what I've seen so far. So obviously, if they clean that up, they definitely should have had this game, I think.
Yeah.
And it would have been, probably coming down to the stretch. I think
I agree.
BC, as well as they played, I think Edmonton still could have came out here and won this. So
yeah. That's
it's
the
very
interesting
interesting
part.
to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think I wanted to say, like, I'm interested to see how this team rebounds, right? I think we talked about, like, I talked a lot about when I remember after the Alouettes lost to Edmonton at the beginning of the year, I was interested to see how they responded against, I think it was Ottawa. And I think it was the Ottawa game right after that. I'm like, okay. I'm like, you guys have been great, right? Won a lot of football games in the regular season with Davis Alexander at the helm.
Yeah.
I'm like, show me how you respond, right? That was the big part. I wanted to see how a contender responds after they got socked in the mouth, right? And everybody, as much as you can be riding high and when you're winning, it's also you're inevitably going to lose at a certain point. I'm always interested to see how a team can kind of rebound and say, okay, how do they put it behind them? Do you see that, like, okay, like it's a fresh slate, are they going to let things get in their head and all that stuff? Like, I feel like they did a really good job of actually executing and not letting it bleed into game 2 or game 3 and really starting it to become a streak, because that's always the big issue, right? And it's not a pessimism, like that's just a chance, right? It's like sports is such a game of momentum anywhere, right? Basketball, football, it's right there, and sometimes, like, even though you may get 6-7 days off, like, from your next game, lingering around, you might be kicking yourself, right? And it's about, I love to see how resilient the team is to be able to overcome things, because there will be times in a season, if it comes down to a playoff game, you might be down by 10, right? Going into the fourth quarter, and you're like, we need to do this. We need to rely on our experience. If you haven't been in that situation before, it can kind of come back to hurt you.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's being battle-tested. It's not just gloating through the regular season. I think that's what I was really interested with Montreal. Flipping it back to Edmonton, I think I'm really interested to see how they're going to bounce back. And this is their first real test. As much as there was a test to win football games, it's how can you respond after you lose football games? And that's what I'm going to be watching for. And I think it's on Thursday night against Ottawa.
Yeah, very interesting. And I think Ottawa's the perfect game to try to, do that and bounce back. So we'll have to see. But, we'll move along here. We'll spend a little bit of time on that last game of the week, mentioning those Ottawa Red Blacks. I almost said Blackjacks, but Red Blacks against the Riders. I do it all the time. Against the Riders, that was one that the Riders squeaked out. And post-game, Trevor Harris said that he didn't play his best game, and he really didn't. So there was plenty of opportunities. The Riders were down 10 early, and it was kind of looking like all Red Blacks early. But, yeah, a close one. I think Mayer, he really played a simple game. Like, he wasn't doing anything crazy. The one touchdown pass he had was literally a check down and a run into the end zone. Like, he wasn't doing anything special per se. So the game was still there for the taking. And eventually the Riders really took it. So, Ottawa, I think their defense played pretty solid. But again, I'm not really sure what direction this team's going, because they're not really going after these games. It doesn't feel like they're necessarily like going out of their way to try to make these big plays. They're keeping it really simple. And, that can be good, especially trying to get Mayer's confidence up, maybe they're working up to something like that, making these bigger plays, but they probably know that they're not going to be, great team this season. So I understand that. But, I just kind of want to see exactly what their plan is. And I've kind of been wondering that the whole season. But, what were your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I kind of thought the same thing too. Like, you've really felt in the first quarter, it's like, wow, it's like Ottawa has some life. And to be honest with you, they have not had very much life early on in the season. But that really felt like, okay, like they came out they understood the importance and the weight of this game. And then it just all went away. And I'm not trying to call people out here, but at a certain point, you got to stop, protecting your quarterback. You got to stop babying your quarterback and show us why you chose this guy. You chose him for a reason. Force him in difficult situations. But quarterback is the most difficult position on a football field, right? You got to be able to deal with difficult situations, be able to throw the ball down the field, be able to, understand, hey, maybe is now the time to take a risk. You're the guy controlling the game on offense. And if you're not the right person and you can't judge that, it starts to affects you in games like this, where you go out and you score 3 points in the second and third quarter. Like, maybe again,
more points the rest of the game. So
yeah, like as much as there is offensive, play calling that is handled by the coaches, like you're executing that, right? And they believed in you to be able to execute that. And at some level, if you want to call it bad play calling, if you want to call it bad decision making, that's really back and forth. You can go either way. But I think at a certain point, Jake Maier has to step up and really show us, why am I here, right? And I think that's really a question that Ottawa should be asking themselves, right? Is why is he here? And Jake should be able to ask himself, why am I here? And I think they can prove it. Like, you don't get to the CFL being a bad quarterback, man. Like, you don't just slip into this job. It's not like you're, the best kid at your high school stadium and, maybe you're the only one that can play quarterback. No, like, this is the second best professional football league in the world. You don't just get here by accident. Like, you're talking, these guys are probably, like, included with the NFL, there's your top 50 quarterback in the world, probably realistically, professionally. And that you should be able to prove that. And I'm just a little bit interested to see, why that hasn't really been fully realized yet. I'm like, you're there for a reason. I think they see something in you. I haven't called him bad. I just think, he's never gotten the chance to really prove us who he is. Yeah, exactly. And he's always kind of been in that mediocre team situation. At a certain point, I'd like to see him take a little bit more risks. I'd like to see him be, even if it comes down to a few more interceptions, I just want to see something work, man. I want to see him show what he really has, because at a certain point, the experiment's going to be over, right? If they go 0-6, are they really going to keep looking at him, or are they going to go to McLeod Bethel Thompson? Like, that's the big part here, is I think that the experiment and the leash is running out, because you can't necessarily lose too much ground anymore. You're almost getting into a situation where you're saying, we got to win every game. And that's not a good part of the season to be at when you're approaching the third way of the season. So I'm really interested to see how they kind of take it. At the end of the day, too, like, this is also, you talk about, again, how do guys deal with adversity? This is something for Ottawa, right? As much as they do not look like a Grey Cup contender, a win changes everything. A win, if you go out and you beat Edmonton, things start to look a heck of a lot better. And if you start to instill some momentum, you can kind of do that. BC really started out terrible in 2011 and then went on to win the Grey Cup. Like, those are the type, or maybe it was 2006. Sorry, one of those two. It was with Darius Jackson. I just remember that from the Elks' bad season 2 years ago. They talked about them being like 0-8, and BC was in the same spot when they went off and won the Grey Cup. So I think a lot of that comes down to the same situation. Is it's not the start. You can't let the start define you. But at a certain time, you guys got to go out and play. You guys got to go out there. They got to win. They got to win you football games. That's why they're there. The coaches aren't throwing the ball. The players have got to go out and win it. So that's my thoughts. I think there's a lot to unpack, but I think, that's kind of my takeaway from this game is you got to understand the weight of the moment, and they got to go out and prove it.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. They got to prove themselves, and that'll be the question probably with Ottawa, the remainder of this season. But flipping it over, Saskatchewan, as much as I said Trevor Harris didn't play great, I think the big thing was, looking at his receiving core, Keyshawn Johnson was great, right? Nine catches, 137 yards, touchdown. But then, Schaefer
everybody
Baker,
else wasn't.
Yeah, they didn't really get him involved. Emulus had a one really bad drop that probably would have been an easy walk-in touchdown. But, for Schaefer Baker, one reception on 5 targets, 9 yards. Yeah. You got to find a way to get him more involved. I don't know exactly what was going on there, but... Yeah, as much as this is probably the best top 3, receiving core in the league, and you only had one guy that was really involved. I don't think you can consistently do that against other teams, any other team probably other than Ottawa. So, there's definitely something to be said there. But I expect this to probably be the worst performance Trevor Harris has this season, and probably the worst performance that this receiving core has this season. So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
I agree too, and just kind of finishing off, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, there's not really much else you can add there. I wonder how much not having AJ Ouellette in the backfield kind of threw the defense a bone to say, okay, we just kind of got to worry about the passing game. It's not, you got to worry about Trevor Harris, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. You got to worry about one of the best running backs in the league and one of the best wide receiver cores in the league. It drops one of those down to just 2. And maybe, that was a good bone to give a team, but at the end of the day, I wonder how much that kind of played an effect into it to maybe have defense, the Ottawa defense say, hey, we know we just got to worry about the receivers, right? If they want to run the football, we'll stop them, right? You understand Conley is not necessarily a game breaker, but we also haven't seen too much of him. I think that was probably the positive, right? Is, let him prove it. Let him prove it to us that he can break that, and we'll focus on the receivers right now. So I think that was probably the number one thing I took away from that. I agree with you, though. I don't think the Riders will do much worse than this. And to be honest with you, too, if you're Trevor Harris, you didn't throw the ball all that well, to be honest with you. But to be honest, even still getting 2 touchdowns and 243 passing yards, you did your job, right? You may not have played your best, but you got the win, and sometimes you do that and you move on, man. You do it and you move on. You don't care if it's a 5-point win. You're the better team in the standings. Dealing with some injuries, I just think he's a veteran. He'll move on from it. I think that's probably the way they're going to look at it. It's just a blip. Just go on to the next one. You won. You're tied for first in the West. You're good. Just keep going.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll see if the Riders can bounce back and really get back to the football that we've seen them play last year. I think they're still maybe a bit away from, achieving their full potential this year. So we'll have to see. That is all for our free version of the National Rundown. If you enjoyed that, go subscribe to our Insiders portion. For only $2.99 a month, you can get our debates, news, headlines, and more. So make sure you go do that ASAP, and we will see you in the next one.